Good morning, Warzone kids. It is a dark and stormy morning on the Trail to the Western Lands, Vermont section. It's kind of rainy. The clouds are just now getting to be a little bit slate gray, I would say. Mottled slate gray. Rosy fingered Dawn is back here somewhere, but she's covered up under the blankets. But it's warm, it's over freezing. Warzone kids is my term for those of us like myself. I'm a child sex abuse survivor. Warzone kids is my term for those of us whose childhoods was more like a hostile war zone against our psyche, our soul, who we are, and less like a nice supportive nursery where you can grow you a hothouse orchid. Now, as I said, I'm a child sex abuse survivor, and that might be your experience. Or maybe yours was more about physical abuse, which wasn't a big part of my experience. Psychological abuse was, emotional abuse was, sexual abuse was. And as an adult, I live with borderline personality disorder. I'm a recovering addict and bulimic. And I think of our psyche, our soul, as a Jenga tower. That game is made of, you start off with a block of wood that's made up of smaller blocks. And with each turn of the game, you slide off one of the smaller blocks from where it belongs and you put it up on top where it don't belong. And the game ends when the tower falls down because it just gets taller and ricketier by the turn. And I think of my soul and the soul of a Warzone kid as a Jenga tower toward the end of the game. Because by the time you get to adulthood as a Warzone kid, your Jenga tower can be a tall, teetery, rickety thing, unstable. Don't step hard near it, don't stomp, don't touch the table, don't even breathe on it. Matter of fact, don't look at it, or it might come falling down. And you can live your whole life oriented around keeping that Jenga tower from falling down. I know I have. But my Jenga tower has fallen down more than once. And I can tell you that for me, how I look at that now is, every end is a beginning. And the end of the Jenga tower, the end of the times in my life when I concentrated on keeping my Jenga tower from falling down, when those times ended, that was the beginning of a time when I could put my Jenga tower back together. Because it's hard to reassemble a Jenga tower while it's still standing up. But after that puppy's fallen down, it's easy. You got pieces all over the place. Just pick them up and put them where they go. That's another way to talk about the word healing, the process of learning and becoming whole. And I see my life as a pilgrimage to the Western Lands, the place of peace and wholeness where I learn and become what I am. It's inherent in the nature of a pilgrimage that the trip itself is an act of devotion. And every day on the Trail to the Western Lands, all I can do is walk today's miles. That's what this channel is about. That's what I'm about, I guess. And I think a lot about the question, how do we live? I studied ancient Greek philosophy in college. Pois boiton, how do we live? That's a question that guides ancient Greek philosophy. And as a guy who's interested in philosophy, I'll tell you, if I'm reading a thinker, a philosopher, and they're not also interested in that question of how do we live? How do we live a human life? What does it mean to live a good human life? Then I ain't really interested in them. Life's short, 24 hours in a day, and there's no point reading someone that has a lot of smart things to say unless they get around to telling me something about what that means for how do I live my life. And I remember a phrase I heard, I'm going to make that the title of this. In these times, we are all high priests in a religion of one. Now, someone said about the philosopher Hegel, who said that he was a Christian, but someone else said of him, if that man was a Christian, he belonged to a sect of which he was the only member. I like that. But I like that phrase, we are all high priests in a religion of one. Now, I'm a 51-year-old Gen Xer. I grew up in Oklahoma. I lived in Vermont for about 20 years. But I'm a man of my time and place, just like anyone else is. I'm a person of my time and place. And throughout most of human history, and let's just, for the sake of argument, take something like an evolutionary timeline. There were Homo sapiens, humans, people just like you and me, boys and girls and men and women and folks for whom those terms didn't mean anything. Let's say 250,000 years, something like that, to take an evolutionary type timeline. If you've got another one, go with that. But however long we've been around, I'd say 250,000 years, let's say that, human beings, I take it as an assumption that they're exactly the same as me and exactly the same as you. They're human beings like us. For most of that time, we have lived in societies, whether that was a family, a clan, a band, a tribe, a people. We've lived in ways where we knew how to live a human life. That's one of the things a society does, a people does. You have a way of living. In ancient Greek, they call that a nomos. A nomos. You'd have a way of living. You'd have the law of your people, how they live. That's handed down in beliefs and practices and views about the universe, standards, fitting into society. You'd know what it meant to be a good man, because that would mean to live in conformity with what your society said. Same thing for being a good woman, be a good child. And so that question would not really present itself to you in the way that it does now. Well, now we live in what many people say with a positive spin on it. We live in a cosmopolitan world. We live in a world, if you think of, New York City as it was when, well, at least one of the modes of immigration in the United States was they'd take boatloads of immigrants and dump them on Ellis Island, dump them in Manhattan, and they'd fan out from there. So the first thing you had to do was figure out how to live in a place absolutely jam-packed with people from everywhere. Well, that's a weird way of living. If you're around nothing but other Sikhs, for example, well, then you live like a Sikh. If you're around nothing but other Jewish folks, then you live like a Jewish person. On and on. But it's weird to live in a place where you're crammed in real close with lots of other people that believe lots of other things and live in lots of other ways. We live in that world today, right now, to a very exaggerated extent. Most of us don't live in a world where you got a nomos, you got a way of living that is prescribed to you by your society around you. Now, we do live in a world where everyone around you, where it can feel like everyone around you is screaming at you to live how they live. Man, that gets on my nerves. What I'd like from other people is for them to give me the space to live how I want to live. But that's me. I'm kind of a loner. My place in any human society is on the outskirts of it. I'd like for there to be a store where I can go in and get stuff, but I'd like to be left alone out on the edge of town. Living in a world where everyone around you is screaming at you to live how they want you to live, and there's a lot of different choices there's a lot of different options. That just ain't the same as growing up in a place where you have a way to live. And these questions about how do you live a good life are kind of answered for you. It just ain't the same. That's why I like the phrase, we're all high priests in a religion of one. And that means a lot to me as a war zone kid. And if you're a war zone kid, I'll bet you that means something to you, because I think this is probably true in all times and places. War zone kids are those of us whose childhoods alienated us from the society around us, starting for many of us with the society in the house that you grew up in, the physical house. Because if you were caused harm by a parent or grandparent or close family member, the world that you grew up in was a world dominated by those events and dominated by the alienation of living with the truth inside yourself of what your experience was. And if that word truth is a stumbling block for you, I'll just skip it. Your experience of the world is the stuff that really happened to you. But if you're a war zone kid, if you're a child sex abuse survivor like I am, that has a unique way of splitting you off from the society around you, starting with your own house. Because that house, the other people that live in that house, are known to you as people that caused you harm, that used you for what they needed. And the other people in that house kind of, you feel like, knew about it. Or they should have known about it. Or they could have known about it if they wanted to. Or part of their brain knew about it, another part didn't, and they made it a full-time job looking the other way. That's alienation, buddy. That's alienation from yourself because you're split. The world outside your eyeballs is full of people living in a dreamland. And the dreamland that's inside of your eyeballs was your real experience. That's a recipe for alienation. And one of my responses to that, well, I learned how to split myself in different pieces. Borderline personality disorder. I learned that the first step to betrayal is love. And I learned that care and affection is always how it starts. And then you move on to the pain and the shame and humiliation and alienation. I responded by putting food and drugs into my body to change how I felt because I didn't like it. But one of the ways I responded was I just could not. I grew up in a close, tight-knit religious community, devout folks. They were born-again Christians, but it's very fashionable these days to heap contempt on the people where I'm from and that kind of people, which in fact is my kind of person. I'm not a born-again Christian, but I grew up in the shadow of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, and I am very definitely from that time and place. I'm a, south of the Mason-Dixon line, west of the Mississippi kind of guy. My people were very ornery because they survived a famine. The black blizzards of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma was a famine. The fact that it was man-made, at least to some extent, and emerged from the folly of humanity does not really set it apart from much else. Our lives are dominated by a combination of what happens in the cosmos and the man-made folly that we engage in to make it worse. But for me, it was a full-time job as a child, making sure I didn't believe any of the stuff that was handed to me to believe. And I grew up immersed in the Bible. I went to Christian schools. I memorized chapters of the Bible. We recited chapters of Proverbs every day in school. And I grew up immersed in the idea that the way you live your life was to be a person of the book. We were people of the book, the Bible. Well, it was a full-time job for me not believing anything that the people around me said I was supposed to believe. I went so far as to exert a massive amount of effort to get as far away from Oklahoma as I could and to study something as opposite as I could think of from born-again Christianity. I went to college in Boston at Boston University, and I studied ancient Greek language and ancient Greek philosophy. Now, the joke was on me because I didn't realize that Christianity, as it's known to me, is a combination, a stew over time of ancient Greek thought and culture, to call it that, combined with Judaic beliefs and culture. Well, we're all high priests in a religion of one. I found myself with a psyche that I was taught that the world works in a certain way. I didn't realize that. I mean, I was taught that it worked in a way espoused by, late mid-20th century evangelical born-again Christians from Oklahoma. But underneath that was the idea that there is some way that the world works. And I spent decades of my life trying to find out, like, what was the real way the world works. Does it work like the ancient Greeks thought it worked? Well, I thought that way was much better than the way I was brought up with. But then again, over time, I saw that if you set me down in an actual ancient Greek polis, that's what they called their city-states. They didn't really have a country. They had cities. Each city-state, that's why they call it that, kind of autonomous city. You know, Athens was a city proper, and then the area around it. And they had a very specific way of living, the Athenian way of living, the Spartan way of living, the Theban way of living, the Corinthian way of living. They were all Greek, but they were all somewhat different. But what they had in common was they did not value things that I value, such as individual freedom and my right as a human being to sort out how I want to live for myself and what things mean to me. They did not view things that way. If you were an Athenian man, the level of pressure on you to be an Athenian man exactly like all the other Athenian men were would have been overwhelming. And I'm talking about the people with the most freedom, the full citizens of Athens, the adult men who had a certain level of property and could vote and fight in the wars. They had lots of them all the time, skirmishes. Well, not a skirmish if you're in it. Women, radically less freedom, radically less. Medics, they had slaves. You were a slave in the ancient world because you were just happened to be a slave. They didn't have what we call like chattel slavery necessarily. It was like race-based as it was in the obscenity of slavery in the United States. One of the great ways to be a slave in the ancient world was just to lose a war. Winning wars is better than losing them. If you lose them, you'll be a slave. Anyway, you know, much as I love and cherish the world of ancient Greece, there's no amount of money you could pay me to live in an ancient Greek polis for a single day. I would conceive of it as a totalitarian regime. You got to believe in the gods of the city. You got to worship them the way you got to worship them. You got to follow the law. You got to be a certain kind of human being within very narrow boundaries. Very narrow. I reject all that. What they had that I don't have in the present moment is they knew how to live. You lived that way. They knew what it meant to be a good person. You display the virtues of an Athenian man, or you display the virtues of an Athenian woman. That's what it meant. And if you didn't like that, your best bet was to get out of Dodge, go live somewhere else because they weren't having it. You can ask Socrates. He just asked a lot of questions about how they knew that was the right way to live. Why wasn't some other way the right way to live? And this stuff they call justice and virtue, what was it really? Where'd they get it from? Because they have things called justice and virtue in other cities, and they're different. And if you go to them other cities, they will also be of the belief that their views on justice and virtue are handed down from the gods, are the right ones. Everyone is thoroughly convinced that how they live is the right way to live. That's just a feature of humanity, as best I can tell. We're all high priests in a religion of one. And if you're a war zone kid and you grew up alienated from the society of your house, let's start smaller. If you grew up alienated from the society of yourself, your own Jenga tower was alienated from itself, then you're probably also alienated from the society in your house. And if you're a war zone kid, you may well have been like I was, alienated from the society of your church, your school, your people. There's a reason I live in Vermont now, about as opposite culturally as you could get from Oklahoma in the 80s. When I'm here in Vermont, I idealize that Oklahoma of the 80s that I worked so hard to get away from. And whenever I venture back to Oklahoma, I find myself idealizing the world of Vermont. Can't wait to get back to it. You see, that's alienation, buddy. That's a way of being. That's a stance toward the world that whatever part of the world I'm in, I don't quite belong in it. Because I didn't quite belong in my world as a child. I didn't quite belong in my house. I did a very good job of being a puppet and pretending to be a child that believed all the hogwash that was handed down to me. That was alienation. I did not believe any of it. And I had a lot of resentment and anger and seething rage against my folks who put so much pressure on me to pretend to be the little boy that they wanted, that I had to be that little puppet all the time. And I learned how to be alienated from myself. Alienated from myself, alienated from my house, alienated from other people. Because deep down in me, I find there's a very strong notion that other people are threats to me more than anything else. What do they need from me? How long do I have to be around someone before I'm going to start feeling them squeezing me to be what they want me to be? And as soon as I feel that squeeze, I tend to split, to use some borderline personality disorder language. That's where I got it. That's why I am that way. We're all high priests in a religion of one. I'm a pilgrim on the trail to the Western lands. My life presently is a journey to learn and become who I am. I'm a pilgrim on the trail to the Western lands, in search of myself, living a life based on reassembling my Jenga tower, on living in a state of peace with myself, not alienation against myself, not war against myself, but peace with myself. We are all high priests in a religion of one. I'm a pilgrim on the trail to the Western lands. We're all high priests in a religion of one. And if you're a war zone kid and you can identify with anything I'm saying, I hope that what you hear is a message that it's okay for your whole life to recognize the fact that much of your life has been a response to the things that happened to you. And you may have been in a state of war against yourself. You may have been alienated with yourself. And whether you like or whether you identify with my language about being a pilgrim on the trail to the Western lands or not, however you think of it, that's okay. Because if my experience has anything in common with yours, one of the most important things you can do with your life is live it. Live your life as it is to you right now, right here, today. Your life. A high priest in the religion of one. Your life. Yourself becoming yourself. Learning and becoming who you are. Living with yourself right here and now. That's what's on my mind this morning. This high priest in a religion of one, a pilgrim on the trail to the Western lands. I'm not alienated from myself this morning, pilgrim, because you're a pilgrim too. That's the language I use to connect myself with you. And all we can do today is get in our miles on the trail. It's a little bit chilly, it's a little bit rainy, but Rosy Fingered Dawn is up there and she'll kiss us good morning soon enough, soon as she comes out from under her blankets. It's a beautiful day, pilgrim. We got a lot of miles we can walk today, and we got a lot to talk about. Let's walk them together and have a chat. Daylight's burning. Let's get a move on.